My boss had my friend taken away in cuffs just for using a minivan to help kids get to school, then tried to bribe me to replace her. When I refused, even after he offered double the pay, he laughed and said, "Everyone's got a price. Guess you're just too dumb to know yours." I didn't answer. That was 8 weeks ago. Yesterday, he walked out of the boardroom. No badge, no job, and no one waiting for him. I've been driving a school bus for Central High for years. It's a rough area. Some kids live in tiny one-bedroom apartments with 4 or 5 others, some in houses that look more like Lego models than homes. I always tried to give them something small to brighten their day. Packets of candy, just enough to make them smile. They rarely ate it right away. Most saved it for later like treasure. The idea actually came from Tilly, my coworker who'd been on the job for 30 years. She even paid for it out of her own pocket. Then came this new guy, a politician with polished shoes, a gold watch, and a clipboard, like a man who'd never set foot on a school bus in his life. He announced route cuts under the banner of budget efficiency. Any stop with fewer than 15 students? Gone. No exceptions. No alternatives. Kids in rural areas? They'd have to walk to the nearest active stop even if it was 5 or 6 miles away. Tilly asked gently, "Will there be any help for them?" He replied without blinking, "That's not our problem." The next week was brutal. Kids were showing up with blisters. Some had been walking since before dawn. 9 straight A students started falling asleep in class. 10-year-old Marcus, whose grandma worked nights at the nursing home, looked like he might collapse getting off the bus. He lived 6 miles from the nearest stop. We were heartbroken. But Tilly didn't just watch, she acted. She pulled money from staff and rented a minivan. Every day she wasn't on duty, she picked those kids up herself. Packed in tight, some on laps, some on the floor, but they got to school. Quietly, she'd drop them off out of sight so no one would notice. But someone did. One morning, during a surprise inspection, the boss caught her. I saw his face when he called her in. I stayed near the office and heard words like liability, termination, final warning. Tilly walked out looking smaller than I'd ever seen her, but not defeated. That weekend, at a staff potluck, she stood in front of all of us with a map. Red X's marked every route that had been cut. "I've been doing this for 30 years, she said. "I drove some of these kids' parents, even some of their grandparents. On Monday, no one drives. We parked the buses, every last one." At first, we hesitated. Miguel said, "We need these jobs." But Tilly replied, "3 parents told me their kids come home starving from the walk, and they can't even afford extra food." One by one, we said yes. That Monday, the buses sat silent, perfect rows of yellow. We stood in front of them, arms linked. By 7:15, the boss rolled up, red-faced and raging. By 7:30, the calls started pouring in. Thousands of students stranded. Parents showed up at the depot. Even Marcus's grandma came straight from her shift, still in scrubs, holding his hand. By Tuesday, the school board called an emergency meeting. By Wednesday, the routes were not only restored, they added 6 new stops. It felt like victory, until there was a knock at the staff room door. It was the police. Tilly was being arrested for unlicensed driving in her minivan, and it didn't take long to figure out who tipped them off. Kyle. He'd been keeping his distance lately. A week later, I saw him downtown at a coffee shop shaking hands with that same politician. I watched through the window as something slid across the table. Kyle looked around, then pocketed what looked like cash. The next day, Kyle had a new watch on his wrist and couldn't meet anyone's eyes. Tilly was out by the afternoon. We all pitched in for her bail. We're still fighting, but now we know exactly who's really on our side. Tilly used her vacation fund. Carlos gave up the savings meant for his daughter's quinceañera, and the very next day, things took an even uglier turn. The politician wasn't done. He filed additional charges against Tilly, claiming she'd endangered the kids by driving without a commercial license. Then came the photos. Kyle had been secretly taking pictures. Kids packed tightly in the minivan, some sitting on the floor, others sharing seats. The images were time-stamped. Looking at them made me feel sick. Kyle had been planning this, smiling to our faces, pretending to be one of us, all while collecting ammo for the other side. The school board suspended Tilly pending investigation. Kyle took over her route in the meantime. I noticed he started carrying around one of those black and white composition notebooks, always writing something down. He was logging every little thing drivers did. Martha eating a granola bar, Carlos playing music for the kids, Sarah letting a child sit up front because the back was full. Nothing escaped him. He was building a case. Against all of us. The politician began calling drivers into his office one by one. Inside, he showed them Kyle's notes, page after page of supposed violations. He threatened to fire anyone who kept supporting Tilly. These meetings always happened at the end of long shifts, when people were tired and easy to corner. Patrick was the first to fold, then Jason, then Larry. By Friday, only 5 of us still stood with her. That's when they scheduled her termination hearing. Marcus's grandmother wasn't about to let them do it quietly. She organized dozens of families, started a phone tree, got over 30 parents ready to speak up for Tilly. But just days before the hearing, the time was suddenly changed. 2 p.m. on a Tuesday, right in the middle of the workday. Most parents couldn't make it. It wasn't random. It was a calculated move to silence the people who needed her most. I ran into Tilly at the grocery store that weekend. She looked tired but still had that fire in her eyes. Her cart was half full of candy. For the kids, as always. She told me she'd discovered something odd. 3 weeks before any of this had started, Kyle had submitted an application for a position that didn't even exist yet. A supervisor role with a $20,000 raise. The job was posted 2 days after Kyle started working with us. Somehow his application had ended up in the trash. Tilly found it behind the district office. Monday morning, she showed up early and went straight to the security office. The guard, Drew, had known her for years. She'd driven his kids when they were in school. He let her review the footage. What she found changed everything. There it was, clear as day. Video of the politician and Kyle meeting privately 3 weeks before the root cuts were ever announced. It had all been planned, every piece of it. Tilly asked Drew for a copy of the video. Word must have spread fast, because the politician showed up an hour later, sweating and furious despite the cool morning air. He threatened to delete all footage under the excuse of privacy. But Tilly had a secret weapon. Her daughter Maria. She worked in IT for the district and had been quietly mastering backup systems and data recovery for years. By the time Tilly called her, Maria had already saved copies of the footage to her personal drive and uploaded backups to a secure cloud, just in case. Then came the hearing. It felt rushed. The boardroom was quiet except for the politician's voice as he walked the board through Kyle's photos and notes, framing each moment like it was some criminal offense. He even used a slideshow, dramatic transitions and all. The few parents who managed to attend weren't allowed to speak. The board just nodded along, barely reacting. They voted to terminate her, 5-2. That afternoon, I watched Tilly pack up her office. 30 years of her life going into boxes. Cards from kids, old field trip photos, a mug that said, "World's Best Bus Driver," a gift from Marcus last Christmas. While sorting through old employment records, her hands suddenly stopped. Her expression changed. Slowly, she pulled out a yellowed piece of paper, hands trembling slightly. It was a termination notice, dated 15 years ago. The name on it was Patricia Hendricks, fired for showing up to work impaired. The signature at the bottom? Tilly's. Patricia Hendricks was the politician's wife. It hit me like a gut punch. This was never about buses, or efficiency, or kids. This was personal. 15 years in the making. Tilly kept digging. Her living room turned into a storm of manila folders and dusty documents. She'd saved everything, every letter, every report. She was old school, meticulous. Her coffee table, couch, even the floor were covered in decades of paper. The smell of old ink and paper filled the air as she pieced together what really happened, and it was only the beginning. Tilly's living room smelled like old paper and quiet heartbreak. She'd pushed her recliner against the wall just to make room for all the files she was sorting through. That night, she found more damning documents. Incident reports from years ago when Patricia Hendricks had been on staff. Reports of her showing up to work unsteady, reeking of vodka at 7 a.m. Complaints from parents whose kids said she smelled funny when she helped buckle them into their seats. One report described a close call. Patricia swerved to miss a mailbox, and 23 terrified elementary schoolers nearly didn't make it home. A little girl threw up from fear. 2 boys cried the rest of the ride. Tilly had done what needed to be done. She fired Patricia to protect kids. And now, 15 years later, she was paying the price. That evening, Tilly called me while I was making dinner. Her voice was different. Tired, sure, but also focused. I could hear papers shuffling in the background. She told me she'd found something else. Patricia was now the registered owner of a new company, Safe Transit Solutions. It had been incorporated just 6 months ago, right around the same time her husband got his seat on the school board. Too perfect to be a coincidence. I pulled up the website. It looked legit. Clean design, neat logo, but something felt off. The testimonials were vague, like copy-paste filler text. No real names, no photos, just phrases like excellent service and top-quality staff. Even the images looked familiar. Stock photos you could find on dozens of other sites. It was all hollow. Fake. This company didn't exist to serve. It existed to replace Tilly. The next morning, the sky was gray and the rain came in slow but steady. The kind that gets into your shoes and stays with you all day. I saw the politician in the corner of the depot lot, right under the broken security camera we all knew had been dead for years. The wires dangled like it had finally given up pretending to work. I watched him hand Elijah an envelope. It stood out, bright white against Elijah's dark jacket. That hit me hard. Elijah had always been solid. He was the one who helped me figure out the tricky turns my first week on the job. Watching him take that envelope felt like watching a tree fall in slow motion. Then Patrick got one too. I saw him count the bills before tucking the envelope into his coat. It wasn't just favoritism anymore. It was recruitment. They were building a network. Every driver who took that envelope became another set of eyes. The break room changed overnight. Conversations stopped mid-sentence when certain people walked in. We stopped sitting together, started eating in our cars, fogged up windows, and silence replacing the laughs and stories we used to share. Tilly wasn't done fighting. She reached out to a parent she trusted, Andrea Chen, a paralegal downtown whose twin boys rode Tilly's route. I remembered them from Halloween. 2 tiny astronauts with matching Snickers bars they offered to the whole bus. Sweet kids. Andrea dove into the legal side of things like a woman on a mission. She knew her way around red tape and stall tactics. She showed up at the district office at 8 a.m. sharp and stayed until security asked her to leave. She brought a thermos, a packed lunch, and an iron will. Most of her requests were delayed or denied. Misfiled forms. Server maintenance. Missing documents. Andrea logged everything. Every excuse. Every brush-off. She filled pages with names, timestamps, call logs, building a paper wall they couldn't ignore. She didn't just push back, she documented the push. Meanwhile, Kyle had turned into something else entirely. He wore his new supervisor badge like royalty. Started wearing ties like he was suddenly too important to be one of us. But he didn't lead. He hunted. He wrote up Stephanie for being 2 minutes late, even though she'd radioed ahead about the train that always blocked Maple Street on Tuesdays and Thursdays. That train had been a problem for 20 years, but suddenly it was an excuse. He dinged Margaret for skipping a walk-around, even though her bus was fine and she'd been doing that route for over a decade without a single issue. Then he came for me, said the candy I gave kids every Friday was a choking hazard, that it violated district policy. The same candy I'd been handing out for 8 years without a single complaint. His reports were getting more creative and more cruel. And the politician backed every one of them, writing notes in the margins like he was building a case against us, one memo at a time. Then, one afternoon, Andrea walked back into the depot with a look on her face that told me something was about to change. Andrea called Tilly with the kind of urgency that makes you drop whatever you're doing. Her voice was breathless, practically vibrating through the phone. Tilly had to tell her to slow down just to catch the gist. But the news was huge. After weeks of being stonewalled by district offices, Andrea had finally found a back door. She'd remembered an obscure state law, something about mandatory transparency for any public contract involving large sums. It had taken her 3 weeks of showing up daily at the state records office, but she finally got through. And buried in the paperwork was the smoking gun, a draft contract between the school district and Safe Transit Solutions, already signed by the politician, not approved by the board yet, but ready to activate the second the district's transport department failed to meet certain performance metrics. And the metrics? Straight up sabotage. 99.9% on-time arrival. 0 complaints. Flawless attendance. It was a setup. Build a crisis, fail on paper, and trigger the contract. Like arsonists who start a fire just so they can play the hero. And the contract itself? A disaster. Safe Transit would charge the district 30% more than their current system. Slash routes even further. Some kids would have to travel 10 miles down unmarked dirt roads just to get to a pickup spot. Drivers would be paid minimum wage, no benefits, no insurance, bare minimum safety checks, fast-tracked or skipped background screenings. But the politician? He'd walk away with a $50,000 consulting fee. His wife? A generous salary. It was corruption dressed up in official paperwork, legalized greed hiding in fine print. Tilly was ready to go public. She wanted to blast it across every news outlet, flood social media, tell the whole world. But Andrea held her back. Page 47. There was a poison clause. If the district pulled out after signing, even if they proved the whole thing was a sham, they'd owe Safe Transit $1 million in penalty fees. 1 million. The district's entire budget was already hanging by a thread. A financial blow like that would cripple it. Even if the board found out, they might still go through with the contract just to avoid the penalty. It was a trap, and we needed a new plan, one that wouldn't cost the schools a fortune. That's when Tilly had her boldest idea yet. We were sitting in her kitchen, coffee cups everywhere, papers stacked like towers, and her cat Chester trying to sit on every single document like he was part of the mission. She looked at us and said, "What if we force their hand?" Her plan was wild, but maybe just wild enough to work. If a group of drivers resigned at the same time, the district would be left without a transport team. The politician was counting on fear. Fear of losing jobs, paying mortgages, feeding families. But what if we weren't afraid anymore? The timing had to be perfect. Too early, and they'd recover. Too late, and the board would approve the contract. We needed to move like a single unit. No mistakes. Over the next 48 hours, I quietly spoke with the 5 drivers still loyal to Tilly. Martha's hands shook as she talked about her granddaughter, a little girl with special needs who couldn't cope with changes in routine. Carlos, father of 3, said his own father, who drove buses in Mexico City, would never forgive him for staying silent. Honor matters, he said. Sarah, the youngest, already had job interviews lined up with UPS and FedEx. She showed me the confirmations on her phone. Hannah was near retirement anyway. Her knees had been giving her grief for years. This was just the push she needed. And Charlotte? She just didn't tolerate bullies. Never had. By Thursday night, we had all agreed. Friday afternoon, Tilly's dining room turned into our war room. Her good china was packed away. The table now held laptops, paper, printers, and determination. Andrea had drafted a simple resignation template. No drama, no accusations, just clear professional notices that we were stepping down for personal reasons. Tilly's old printer groaned with every page it spat out. Sounded like a wheezing dragon with asthma. She made copies of everything. We took photos of us dropping the letters into the after-hours mail slot, time-stamped down to the minute. No room for them to claim we'd done anything wrong. Saturday morning, the sun came out, but the mood was cold. Somehow word had gotten out. Maybe Kyle saw us meeting. Maybe someone cracked. Doesn't matter. At exactly 7 a.m., Tilly's phone rang. It was him. I could hear his voice from across the room, sharp, angry, almost shaking. He offered her the job back, with a 20% raise. Said all would be forgiven if she tore up the resignation. Tilly said nothing. Then came the threats. He'd make sure she never worked again. Said he had contacts in every district within 100 miles. He'd blacklist her from driving anywhere. His voice got higher with every sentence, like a violin string pulled too tight. She hung up without a word, and for the first time in weeks, she smiled. He started calling the rest of us, one by one. You could tell he was working off a list, probably the same one he'd used to track complaints. His offers grew more desperate with each call. Jason was promised Kyle's supervisor position and a signing bonus. He even mentioned a company car, which made us laugh. What use would we have for a car when we all drove buses? Martha got a call too. He offered her $5,000 cash just to show up Monday. Said he'd deliver it himself, in small bills if she preferred. Carlos! He was promised his pick of the best routes and a brand new bus with working air conditioning. The good kind, as we all called it. But none of us took the bait. We'd seen what his promises were worth. We knew the cost of saying yes. Selling out meant becoming another Kyle, another informant. And we weren't willing to trade our integrity for a paycheck. We agreed. We'd rather flip burgers than help him break this system any further. Sunday night, we delivered our resignation letters, just like we planned. The depot was silent. Only the parked buses watched us, lined up like sleeping giants. Their yellow paint looked almost silver in the dark. As I dropped my envelope in the slot, I felt a twist in my gut. I'd been at this job for 8 years. These kids weren't just passengers, they were family. I knew their birthdays, their favorite songs, who needed a barf bag on sharp turns, and who always forgot their backpack. But sometimes, walking away is how you protect something you love. Monday morning came fast. My body still woke me up at 5 a.m., out of habit. I showered, made coffee, then stood in my kitchen realizing I wasn't going in. Across town, the depot sat in silence. 6 buses, 6 routes, no drivers. By 6 a.m., the politician showed up earlier than I'd ever seen. His shirt was wrinkled. His tie was loose. He paced in the lot, yelling into his phone, his gestures frantic. The calls from parents began around 6:30. Nobody knew where the buses were. The district's phone system collapsed under the volume. The emergency text system failed. No one had planned for this kind of disruption. By 7, the depot was swarmed with parents, confused, angry, scared. Cars spilled into the street. Someone had to step in and direct traffic. Still, the politician tried to spin the story, claimed we'd abandoned the kids without warning. He stood on the loading dock like he was giving a campaign speech, full of fake concern and half-truths. But Marcus's grandmother was there, and she wasn't having it. She shouted the real story, about Tilly's arrest, about the minivan, about the routes being cut to make room for a shady contract. Her voice carried, and then others joined in. A mother whose daughter had walked miles in the rain. A father who'd been late to work every day for 2 weeks. One by one, the voices rose. It was like a dam breaking. Then the local news showed up. Not the big networks, just the community station that normally covered bake sales and school concerts. But that didn't matter. Their camera worked just fine. The reporter tried to get footage, and the politician tried to block her, saying the lot was district property. Too late. Parents were already speaking, already filming. The story was out. By 8 a.m., it was spreading online. 6 drivers quitting at once was unheard of. People wanted to know why. The reporter, a young woman probably on her first major assignment, leaned into it. She interviewed parent after parent, each adding fuel to the fire. The school board called an emergency meeting for that same day. This time, they couldn't hide it behind a 2 p.m. time slot. Too many people were involved now. The meeting was set for 6 p.m., and by 5:30, the place was packed. People filled the boardroom, lined the walls, spilled into hallways. The fire marshal almost shut it down. Folks were sitting on floors, standing on chairs. I'd never seen anything like it. The air felt electric, charged with anger, truth, and hope. Andrea stepped forward, calm as ever. She passed out copies of the safe transit contract, color-coded and tabbed for easy reference. Yellow for policy violations, pink for financial red flags, green for safety failures. Her PowerPoint broke it all down in simple terms. This wasn't just incompetence, it was a setup. The politician tried to interrupt, but the board president, a steely woman who'd served for decades, shut him down with one glare and a gavel smack so loud it echoed. That's when the room shifted. For the first time, they were listening. Parents testified, teachers spoke, kids were mentioned by name. The sleepless mornings, the tears, the exhaustion. The truth was finally being heard, and it was uglier than anyone had guessed. The politician made one last desperate move, straightened his tie, shuffled his papers, claimed the contract was necessary, that the district simply couldn't afford its current model. That privatization was the only way forward. He had charts, graphs, glossy packets with projections, but Andrea wasn't done. She exposed every lie, every trick, showed how safe transit would cost more while offering less. She brought in a local economics professor to verify her findings. The professor stood and calmly explained how the math was rigged. Clear, unbiased. Then came the final blow. The board's own lawyer, who'd been flipping through contracts at rapid speed, stood up and said one sentence that changed everything. The contract was signed without authorization. Turns out, the politician wasn't allowed to approve deals over $100,000 without full board approval. And the safe transit contract? Worth millions over 5 years. He'd broken district policy, possibly state law, and now, finally, he'd have to answer for it. The district's lawyer closed the file with finality in his voice. The contract was never valid. The politician hadn't had the authority to sign it, which meant the $1 million cancellation penalty didn't apply. There was no contract. You could see the color drain from the politician's face in real time. He went from furious red to sickly white like someone had pulled the plug. He collapsed into his seat, stunned and hollow, his whole scheme unraveling in front of a room full of people. The board didn't hesitate. The vote was unanimous. Effective immediately, he was removed from his position. Stripped of all privileges, benefits, access, everything. They even called security to escort him out. And as he walked past us, slumped and silent, I saw something in his eyes for the first time. Fear. His plan was ruined. His wife's bus company? Useless without the contract. His career? Over. All that power he clung to, gone because he tried to ruin the life of a woman who once did the right thing. A security guard collected his badge and keys. Then someone in the crowd started clapping. Just one person. But it spread. Fast. Suddenly the entire boardroom was on its feet, applauding, not just for Tilly, but for the truth, for accountability. But the celebration wasn't the end. The board still had to fix the damage. They reinstated Tilly immediately, with full back pay and a written apology. They offered jobs back to all 6 drivers who had quit and even proposed a review of driver wages. They also created new support positions to lighten the route load and make the system more humane. The very crisis that man had manufactured became the spark for real reform. The board president, usually so distant, shook each of our hands personally. When she looked us in the eye and said, "Thank you for protecting our kids," I could tell she meant it. As for Kyle, his shiny supervisor title vanished. They reassigned him to night maintenance, cleaning buses on 3rd shift, alone. Word is, he tried to apologize to Tilly once in the break room. She didn't stop walking. Some bridges don't get rebuilt. As for the drivers who took envelopes, there were consequences. Elijah had to return his, unopened. Patrick got suspended without pay. The board made it clear, no more silence, no more deals behind closed doors. That Tuesday morning felt different. The air was clear, the sun rising like a banner. It was as if the whole town was exhaling. When Tilly returned to the depot, her bus was waiting for her. But it didn't look the same. 30 thank you cards had been taped to the windows. Some bought, some handmade. One had glitter. Another had macaroni glued into the shape of a heart. Marcus was there too, waiting at her stop, holding a Ziploc bag with 2 sour crawlers he'd saved just for her. For 2 whole weeks. His grandma stood beside him, tears streaming down her face. She hugged Tilly like she might never let go. The kids cheered as she climbed aboard, and before she could even start the engine, she had to wipe her eyes. From my own bus across the lot, I watched her pull out, back on her route. The sun hit those thank you notes just right. They lit up like stained glass. It looked like she was driving a bus full of stars. And maybe she was. That day, I realized something deeper than just job security. We hadn't just saved our routes. We'd saved trust between a community and the people who serve it. And that's worth more than any contract. The weeks after were oddly normal. I went back to picking up the same kids at the same stops. Only now, parents waved more often. Some brought coffee. One mom even left a thermos every Tuesday. It was good coffee too, not the watery stuff from the teacher's lounge. But just when we thought it was over, Andrea called. The politician had hired a lawyer. He was threatening to sue the district for wrongful termination. Said we'd conspired against him. Said the resignations were coordinated just to make him look bad, which, to be fair, they were. But proving it legally? That's another story. By Monday, official letters started arriving, formal, intimidating. Pages of legal language saying we might be subpoenaed, that we might have to testify. But Tilly? She wasn't shaken at all. Her living room still looked like a law office. Filing boxes stacked shoulder high, photos, receipts, timelines, everything labeled, dated, organized. She'd even laminated some of the critical pieces, like the pictures of kids with blistered feet and the rental paperwork for the minivan. She had receipts for the candy, the gas, the mileage. Every move she made, backed up with documentation. Her case wasn't built on emotion. It was built on proof. And she was ready. It felt like Tilly had been preparing for this moment all along. But then came Patricia, the politician's wife, with a new tactic. One morning, she showed up at the depot dressed like she was heading to Sunday service. Pearls, heels, the whole act. She cornered me by my bus and started speaking softly, like we were old friends caught in some silly misunderstanding. She said her husband had only been trying to help the district save money, that we'd ruined their lives over nothing. Her voice wavered like she might cry. Then came the offer, a supervisor job at Safe Transit, double my current pay. Said I could help her rebuild. I told her no thanks, I liked where I was. Then I walked away. She tried the same routine on the others, but no one bit. And that's when things got weird. Buses started breaking down for no clear reason. Flat tires that hadn't been flat the night before. Sugar in fuel tanks. An old trick but still effective. Scratches across the paint like someone had taken a key to them. Kyle was working 3rd shift, alone. No one else had access. But we couldn't prove anything. The security cameras in the garage? Broken, according to the company that maintained them. That company? Owned by the politician's brother-in-law. Of course. So we started double-checking everything. Full inspections before each run. One morning, my bus wouldn't start at all. The mechanic later told me the fuel line had been tampered with. Water added in just the right amount to destroy the engine if it had run. That same day, Martha's front wheel lug nuts had been loosened. Just enough to cause a dangerous wobble if she'd gotten up to speed. Sarah's emergency exit had been sealed shut with industrial glue. This wasn't mischief. It was sabotage. And someone was going to get hurt. That night, Tilly gathered us at her kitchen table. We needed a plan. We couldn't go to the police without proof, and the broken security system wasn't giving us any. That's when Megan spoke up. Her nephew worked at an electronics store. He could get us 6 tiny security cameras, battery-powered, hidden, perfect for inside a bus. We pooled our money and got them. 3 nights later, we caught Kyle red-handed. The footage wasn't Hollywood quality, but it didn't need to be. It clearly showed him in his uniform using his master key to open Tilly's bus, then pouring liquid into the gas tank. Gotcha. But when we brought the footage to the new transportation director, she frowned. "We can't use this," she said. "You installed recording devices on district property without permission. Kyle could sue us for violating his rights." The absurdity was enough to make your head spin. But Andrea, she found the angle. We couldn't submit the footage as formal evidence, but we could file a detailed complaint, list every incident, note the dates, match them to Kyle's shift log. And that's what she did. Once the district opened an internal investigation, the truth poured out. Kyle had been billing overtime for repairs he caused himself. Maintenance logs lined up too perfectly. He was vandalizing the buses, then getting paid to fix them. They fired him. Not for sabotage. They didn't need to go that far. They nailed him for payroll fraud. He tried filing for unemployment but was denied. Last we heard, he moved in with his sister out of state. Good riddance. After that, the mechanical incidents stopped. Our new maintenance tech, River, was a breath of fresh air. He fixed problems Kyle had ignored for months, things that could have gotten someone seriously hurt. Meanwhile, the politician's lawsuit fell apart. His lawyer kept asking for extensions, said they needed more time to gather evidence, but we all knew what that meant. They had nothing. In the end, the district filed a countersuit. Damages, legal costs, wasted staff time, cleanup from the chaos he caused. And since he'd signed a contract without authority, he was personally liable. His homeowner's insurance wouldn't cover it. It wasn't an accident. It was deliberate, and it cost him everything. Patricia's company folded. Without the district's guaranteed contract, they couldn't get funding. Investors bailed. Loans dried up. She'd quit her previous job to run the company, and now they had no income. I saw their house listed in the paper. Price to move fast. The sleek luxury car disappeared, replaced by a rust-spotted sedan. And the politician? Someone saw him 3 towns over, knocking doors with a clipboard and a forced smile, selling insurance. Just another man in a wrinkled suit trying to explain the fine print. Sometimes karma doesn't come crashing in like thunder. Sometimes it shows up with a briefcase and a long walk. Spring came early that year. The snow melted fast, and by February, the kids were already talking about summer. Then, something incredible happened. I was on my afternoon route when I saw a crowd at one of the stops, about 15 parents standing together under a handmade banner. "Thank you, bus drivers." There was a folding table, a few balloons, and trays of homemade cookies. It wasn't organized by the district. No official program. Just parents who remembered, who cared. They popped up at different stops all week, each little celebration surprising a new driver. In April, the board approved our raise. It wasn't huge, but it was honest. They hired 3 more drivers, shorter routes, more time for safety checks. They even fixed the busted garage cameras and upgraded the whole system. The board president? She personally rode along on every route, talking to kids, learning their names, listening to parents. For once, someone at the top saw what we saw every day. And finally, we were just drivers again. No drama, no politics. Just doing what we loved, helping kids get safely to where they're going. She may have been in her 70s, but you'd never know it watching her climb those bus steps, clipboard in hand, eyes sharp, energy like she was 20. The new board president made it her mission to learn every route personally. She talked with drivers, students, parents, took notes on every pothole, every sketchy intersection, every stop that needed better lighting. It wasn't politics, it was care. Tilly got an award that spring from the State Transportation Association, a plaque and everything, recognizing her 30 years of service. She tried to turn it down, said she was just doing her job. But Marcus's grandma had nominated her with a heartfelt letter that left half the room teary-eyed. The ceremony was small, a luncheon in a hotel conference room, but it felt like something big. Former students showed up from every direction. Some were grown now, with kids of their own. One man drove 3 hours just to thank her. He told a story about being bullied years ago and how Tilly quietly rearranged the seating chart to keep him safe. He said he'd never forgotten it. Then in May, the politician made one last desperate appearance. He showed up at a school board meeting during public comment, clutched a typed-out speech, talked about being targeted, about discrimination, about conspiracies. But no one was listening. Parents whispered to each other while he rambled. The board president let him finish, then calmly moved on. No questions, no response. He walked out the side door, head down. That was the last time anyone saw him at a district event. His 15 minutes were officially over. By June, everything had settled into something new, something better. The routes were more efficient. The pay was fairer. Management actually listened. And the kids? They still got their Friday candy. Only now it was a district-approved Student Appreciation Initiative. Of course, Tilly still paid for it herself. Some habits don't change. We got a proper break room, too. AC that worked, chairs that didn't squeak, and coffee that didn't taste like burnt socks. Small things, sure. But they said something loud. We matter now. The last day of school came as it always does. Bittersweet. Excited kids. Relieved parents. I watched familiar faces climb on and off, knowing some wouldn't return in the fall. Some were heading to middle school, others were moving away. At one stop, Marcus handed me a drawing of a yellow bus with a stick figure that, apparently, was me. His grandma had written thank you in elegant cursive on the back. I keep it tucked under my sun visor. Still do. A week later, we had our end-of-year meeting. Usually those are just checklists and memos, but not this time. The new transportation director? She'd been a driver once. She knew. She asked for our input. Routes, schedules, safety. Stephanie brought up a blind curve on Route 12. The director took note and said it would be evaluated. Carlos suggested staggered pickups to ease traffic. She said she'd run the numbers. Then Tilly stood up and told us she was retiring. Not because she had to, because she was ready. 31 years behind the wheel. She'd stayed an extra year just to make sure everything was running smoothly, to leave the kids and us in good hands. We threw her a real party that July. Rented the VFW hall. Former students filled the place. Even the mayor came and declared it Tilly Thompson Day. She cried. Happy tears. Every speech, every hug, every thank you hit her right in the heart. She deserved it all. And me? I'm still on Route 47. Same route. Same old thermos. Same Friday candy. Some of my new riders are little siblings of kids I drove years ago. They hop on already knowing my name, already expecting a treat. The cycle continues. Sometimes I think about everything we went through. About Kyle and the politician, and how easily it all could have gone the other way. We could have stayed quiet, played it safe, let them gut something good. But we didn't. We stood up, and that made all the difference. Not just for us, but for every kid who needs a safe ride, a trusted adult, a moment of kindness on the way to school. That's worth more than any paycheck. The new school year starts next week. My tires are new. The AC works. My candy stash is stocked. And on Tilly's old route, a new driver named Campbell just started. Young, energetic, kind. I told her about the candy tradition and she smiled. Already bought 5 pounds of Sour Patches, she said. Some traditions are worth keeping. Some fights are worth having. And some jobs? They're more than just jobs. They're a calling, a responsibility, a privilege. I'm proud to be a bus driver. Always have been. Always will be.